Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. The media and politics are intertwined as never before. Each needs the other, but both are suspicious and distrustful of the other's intentions. Whether new, traditional, or social, the media are not only relating what happens, but increasingly playing a part in how the story unfolds. Recently, Donald Trump has bypassed television for Twitter and succeeded in creating his own narrative. So, how does the telling of the story sometimes become the story itself? How do politicians attempt to manipulate what focus the media take? And are we living in a post-factual world in which truth inevitably gives way to entertainment and storytelling? We'll also take time to consider Donald Trump's suggestions in an interview with Fox News that he might stop abiding by the one-China policy upheld by the United States for the past 4 decades. To discuss all these issues, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Victor Gao Zhikai, Director of the China National Association for International Studies, and Anna Tungan, our regular current affairs commentator. But before we begin our discussion, let's take a look at this.
On Fox News Sunday, US President-elect Donald Trump said he fully understands the One China policy, but he questioned whether the US should continue its decades of tradition unless Beijing makes concessions on trade and other issues. Speaking in Oslo at the first Nobel Peace Prize Forum, former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger expressed his stance on Trump's recent behavior.
No doubt, the president-elect is a personality for whom there is no precedent in modern American history. And his campaign included rhetorical elements, challenging patterns, heretofore considered traditional.
Earlier this month, in an unprecedented break with the accepted China-US protocol, Trump spoke with the leader of the Taiwan region by phone. Beijing was swift to respond, lodging a stern complaint with Washington. Foreign Minister Wang Yi reiterated China's diplomatic protest.
Adherence to the One China principle is the cornerstone of the healthy development for China-U.S. ties and an important political basis. We certainly hope this political basis is not interfered with in any way. The Taiwan side's engagement and a petty action cannot change the One China structure by the international community. I believe that it won't change the long-standing One China policy of the United States government.
Gentlemen, do you think media and politicians are born to be tough lovers for each other? They don't like each other, but they cannot do without each other.
I think the interrelation and interaction between media and politics is a very important one and ever-changing one. I think more recently, President-elect Donald Trump probably has very much changed the interrelationship between the traditional media and politics at the highest level.
But he's never changed the relationship between the media and politics, has he?
Yeah, I think he has.
He has fundamentally changed the relationship between media and politics?
Oh, absolutely. He's bypassing the media. The media is always...
He's bypassing the traditional media, not the new media.
Traditional media, but this is the whole point. We're living in a world where a candidate who PolitiFact, which is an independent, bipartisan group, said that 70% of the factual claims he made while on the campaign trail were false. Just false, lies. So this kind of post-fact, post-truth kind of situation that has been brought up by social media is going to be one of the great battlegrounds.
So we were watching the footage about the presentation of Dr. Henry Kissinger. He was saying that during the campaign, presidential hopefuls would inevitably say things like rhetorical, challenging, generating
right
headlines without meaning, intentionally having the true message to be delivered.
Yeah, there's an old saying, campaign promises are made to be broken. But there was this idea that somehow he would shift his personality and that the way he did things from the primaries when he got into the general election, and then they said, oh, no, he'll shift when he becomes, if he becomes the president-elect. Now people are saying, well, maybe he'll shift after he becomes president. I would say that he's a 70-year-old man who is not going to change his stripes at this point.
If you allow me to add one point, I think whichever person goes into the White House, that person, man or lady, should be a man or a person of integrity, and his words should be trusted, not only by his inner circle, but by the people in the United States at large, but also by many other countries in the world. After all, the President of the United States is a very important global leader. And now, if in Donald Trump's case, whatever he says are not to be trusted, or you can trust what he says to your own harm, that's not the type of personality people want to see in the White House. And I hope he will climb up the learning curve very quickly between now and January the 20th and really understand the consequences and implications of whatever he says and does. He cannot surprise the world.
Gentlemen, I believe the international audiences of our program may easily understand the Chinese anger arising from his recent remarks about Taiwan or possible violation and breaking of the protocol that the United States has practiced for the past 4 decades. However, when you say this man is not to be trusted, it might be a little bit too strong for the international audience, because the only hallmark and catchphrase that the Americans tend to use during the campaign would be unpredictability. So does unpredictability means mistrust for this president-elect?
Well, I think it does. Let's just look at actions that cannot be denied. I mean, he said, look, Obamacare gets repealed the first day, and now he's saying, well, that he's walking back on that. The wall, instead of a wall that was going to be higher and higher, now it's, well, wall, fence, you know, it's something similar. All right, I'm going to prosecute Hillary Clinton. All right, that has gone by the side. All right, he's now starting to get blowback.
Was he being assisted by the Russian hacking? Well, he said he would prosecute Hillary.
That's another show. That's another show in its entirety. I mean, the fact that he's saying, all right, it's preposterous that he's denying that an investigation should even occur is highly suspicious. Why would you say, before you know the facts, no, I don't want to know? All right, it's preposterous, as he keeps saying. How does he know it's preposterous if he doesn't have the facts? It's a very, very suspicious.
I think coming back to the Russian hacking, it either has happened or it has not happened. But you need to do a real investigation, leaving no stone unturned before you can reach that conclusion. I think, you know, if Donald Trump is really telling his mind, he should not be able to know whether the Russians have hacked into the presidential election process of the United States. But there are also more disturbing symptoms claiming that the connection between Mr. Donald Trump or people around him and the Russian side may go even deeper. And that really will raise a lot of alarms, not only in Washington and the people in the United States, but in many other capital cities throughout the world. What exactly are they up to?
In the immediate aftermath of the campaign day, and the election day, people on both sides of the Pacific Ocean were talking about the same message. How long can the presidency of Donald Trump be sustained with regard particularly to his campaign pledges? I mean, the campaign pledges are meant to be broken, but in his particular case, he is so unpredictable. So, do you think we should take this man seriously?
You have to take him seriously because he's in one of the most powerful
or
seats in the world.
Or should we take his team seriously?
Well, his team is very serious, and you can start looking at it and see a lot of what, by their past words and writings, you can see clearly where they're trying to go. This is a very conservative, very wealthy group of people who believe that the world should adhere to American exceptionalism. And what they've chosen to do is redraw what they think is the three-cornered game, move away from China towards Russia in order to isolate China. With Obama, it was all about trade and the access and the pivot to Asia. Now what you're seeing here is these neocons. But even within them, there are powerful forces that are going against that particular trend, from the Republican Party itself.
We have two different accounts about what you call American exceptionalism. The first is about the geopolitical position, meaning the United States is protected by two weak neighbors, Canada in the north and Mexico down to the south. And it's also protected by two big oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic. So it's never been invaded except for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The second version is about religious crusade. Now, Dr. Harry Kissinger said in one of his books that what is called the American exceptionalism is about religion. Until you can have a full and deep understanding about what religion actually means for American politics, you would not have a precise interpretation about the policy options of the DC. What do you think of the two versions, the two accounts?
I think both versions of exceptionalism would apply to the United States. Geography-wise, the United States is in a very, very unmatched and a unique position. But in terms of ideology, rather than
the only
purely
invader
religion,
is hurricanes each year.
Hurricanes, all the British who invaded, after the independence of the United States, they even burned the White House, and the White House got its name from the burning by the British. But putting that aside, I think in terms of the ideology, more than purely religion, I would say, then the Americans believe they have a mandate. They need to spread it out around the world. They need to put their value system on top of the others. Pax Americana should be the rule for people throughout the world. Yeah, that is changing. I don't think people in other parts of the world will buy that version anymore, because the world is turned out to be very much more diversified.
Anna, why do you think so far the Chinese government has just given a pretty quiet and low response to the protocol-breaking remarks by President-elect Donald Trump on Taiwan?
Well, quite frankly, this is obviously what Donald Trump is looking for. He's looking for a strong reaction. There are many people who feel that he's trying to use tensions with China as a basis to do deficit funding for two things that he has promised, and that is necessary for his domestic policy. That's a big increase in defense spending, right? 350 ships, and also infrastructure. But he's cut taxes. You can't cut taxes and spend more unless you're creating deficits. In order to make that happen, he needs a crisis. So some people are betting that he's using this to artificially hype up energy in order to go back home and said, look, this is necessary, we have to do this.
Well, there's a popular assumption. A baby cries for attention, right? A baby that is able and good at crying would have enough supply of milk. Now, having said this, what do you think of the conflicting signals that President-elect Donald and his team sent to China in particular? On the one hand, he threatened to give up the One China principle in his interview with Fox News. The other signal that he sent was appointing Elaine Chao, former Secretary of Transport of the Bush administration, as the Secretary of Transportation. She used to be Secretary of Labor. This time around, she is recommended by the President-elect as the next Secretary of Transport, in the hope, perhaps, of attracting investment from China in the area of infrastructure building. The second interpretation is the use of her husband,
Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell, party whip, majority leader in the Senate. So, do you think the conflicting signals are deliberately used and manipulated by the Trump team for China to make concessions?
First of all, as far as Mr. Donald Trump is concerned, in his capacity as president-elect, no one should completely trust what he says at this stage. No one knows what exactly is his real intention. Now, secondly, I think from the Chinese perspective, we hope he is barking on the wrong tree, mainly because if he really wants to violate the One China policy, who will be the victims? The American people will suffer if China and U.S. relations fall apart.
Our international audience, which is itself very diversified, easily understand your anger, because you keep saying this man is not trusted. You said so at least twice so far. But given the low and the quiet response from the foreign ministry towards the provocative remarks on Taiwan, it means, in the understatement of the Chinese official response, perhaps we should give him a chance, at least for the first 100 days of his presidency, and figure out what he really wants.
Yeah, exactly. If I may add a point, I think the Chinese government up to now is doing the right thing, exactly the right thing, because they made representations, stern representations, not against Donald Trump, but with the State Department in the United States. And the State Department, amazingly, came up with a statement that they actually still are bound by the One China policy, they respect the One China policy, and they actually distance themselves from the representation by
they're leaving.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is coming in, he's bringing a new team.
Let's wait until Donald Trump goes into the Oval Office.
I know nothing about American politics, but Anna, tell me, is it a commitment, is it an obligation for the President President-elect to be briefed regularly by the State Department, by the White House on policy issues every day during the period of transition? Is it something like a requirement?
It's not a requirement. He has access to everybody. He is given access to all the departments. He has a security briefing, which he has chosen not to take. It's a very unusual that a president who has no experience would turn down the opportunity to learn each day about what the world is going through and what the U.S. place in it is. But he's, in terms of what you're saying, blowing hot and cold, good Donald versus bad Donald, yes. This is a hallmark of everything that he's been doing in his business practices from day one. And it's been very successful for him. So he's trying to move his business practices into the diplomatic sphere, and it doesn't work. He does not understand. And the danger that I see is, I understand that China's position is to be calm. But the danger is that many people outside might see this calmness as a tacit willingness to say that this is a bargaining chip. All right, I was on the street today and I was approached by somebody and I asked him about the situation. This is a very low-level guy, and he said, I will send my son to
the
fight
only child
to the
of his
front.
family?
The only child of his family. I will send my son to defend China.
That's very serious.
It is very serious, and this is the part that many people in the international audience don't understand. This is not a bargaining chip. This is not something that you can put on the table and talk about. You understand? To do this, Donald Trump would have to abrogate, to cancel the original communique that was signed between China and the U.S., because that is where it says there's a one China principle. To do that means you go back to square one, back to the Cold War. There's nothing left. Now, the rest of the world is going to have to make a decision about what that means and how they want to react to that.
Thank you very much. How should we look at the militancy of this president-elect on the issue of Taiwan? Is this president-elect setting Taiwan Strait ablaze? Is he unilaterally changing the status quo of the Taiwan Strait, which is the most important issue in U.S.-China relationship? We'll come back to examine these critical issues of a crucial importance after the break. Stay with us, please. Welcome back, gentlemen. Since this president-elect has no idea about foreign policy, he's never in the D.C. of Washington, he has no political experience as a professional politician. That's why he got elected. This is one of the major reasons why those losers in the Rust Belt voted him into office. Having said this, he's surrounded by a strong team of hawks, super hawks, so to speak, who prioritize the issue of Taiwan in our bilateral relationship, as if they have no idea about how dangerous any provocative behavior might mean for the future of the relationship. What do you think of, for example, the recent recommendation by President-elect Donald Trump for Rex Tillerson, right? What's the name of the Rex
Tillerson.
Rex Tillerson.
Yeah, head of the
ExxonMobil.
Now, why a business executive, a strong candidate for being Secretary of State?
First of all, to your question about Taiwan, I think Mr. Donald Trump and his advisors and future cabinet members should become fully aware of the fact that China will never tolerate the breakaway from the one China policy. And the one China policy remains the red line and the bottom line. If, for example, Donald Trump eventually wants to choose between Taiwan and mainland China, there will be a choice to be made. Does he really want to recognize Taiwan by breaking away from China? Does China need to sever its diplomatic relations with the United States? If the United States recognizes Taiwan, theirs will be the tough choice. And I don't think by severing relations with China, the United States is going to gain anything. Nothing to be gained by the United States, and the American people will suffer. And I think that is the reality on the ground, and neither Donald Trump nor his advisors should pretend that they don't know this end game. China will never back away 1 inch from the One China policy. Now, talking about Mr. Rex Tillerson, I actually know him personally. We met many times in London, in Oslo, and other capital cities, mostly on international energy conferences. I think Rex Tillerson himself is a man of integrity, is a man of principle, and is a very, very successful executive of one of the largest multinational companies in the world. But to become the Secretary of State, it is a completely different ballgame, and you need very different skill sets. You need to have very different tools in your toolbox to run the State Department, the top diplomat in the United States, versus running ExxonMobil. So I wish Mr. Tillerson all the good luck, and I think his integrity, at least, his factual basis, and his professional way of dealing with these corporate matters will bring positive impact
good
on
buyers in favor of
Donald Trump. Yeah.
In favor of Rex Tillerson. But my point is, since this guy is a guy of energy industry, and he may, as a result, know very well his counterparts in Russia.
Yes.
And the team of the...
He's received an award from Putin.
Exactly. And the team of a president-elect really wants, perhaps, to get close to Russia by lifting economic sanctions, by acknowledging that President Assad should not be overthrown as part of the solution. Now, many concessions are likely to be made, and therefore, do you think China will be the victim?
No, I don't think China will be the victim. I think this is ill-conceived. The idea of trying to partner with Putin and Russia against China is inherently weak, right? This idea that Putin will go along with this. Putin has his feet in many camps. He would love to see the restrictions, the economic embargoes lifted as soon as possible. And if he's able to get Trump to do that, he will be very happy. But I think when you start looking at Putin, he looks at Trump as somebody who's going to bring America down in a way that he could never do it from the outside. And I think this is the real end game for Putin. It's not to put America back on top, right? The idea, the notion that Russia would be rooting for the U.S. should be transparent to everybody as not going to happen.
A columnist in the United States who recently wrote an article about Rex Tillerson said, this guy, whom you know very well on international occasions, even established a special department for political intelligence analysis to give a forecast about the investment environment. And he said, he said to prefer to do business transactions with a dictatorship, because a dictatorship may somehow ensure the predictability of the investment environment.
So this is the guy you want running your State Department for a democracy.
What do you think of this part of his background against which he's likely to run and execute the foreign policy of the president-elect?
Running the State Department will be something completely new and alien to Mr. Rex Tillerson, and I really just hope him good luck in doing this new job. On the other hand, I think for a multinational company like ExxonMobil, which is profit-driven, which need to invest in the long term, in the long cycle, 10 years, 20 years, without stability in the country you are going to invest billions of dollars, then you are not going to talk. You are not going to talk about.
Then the Taiwan Strait is
like. You're pointing out the problem with having a businessman trying to get involved in diplomacy. Now, if he is pushed forward during the hearings, there's going to be a lot of discussion about Exxon and their activities, for instance, in Africa, in many other areas where they've made deals with dictators on this notion of stability. But the theory is that the U.S. is a liberal, democratic, capitalist beacon on the hill. How does that measure with we want to do deals with dictators because it suits our economic purpose?
Let me go back to the points I presented in addressing the background of this guy, Rex Tillerson. He prefers to have a stability to ensure business transactions. Now, what if in the first 100 days of his presidency, Donald Trump and his team keep talking about giving up the One China principle, and then easily you can forecast military exercises, missile launches, further stifling of international breathing space of Taiwan by normalizing relationship with some small countries in the Caribbean area, or even in Africa. So that threatens to further destabilize the Taiwan Strait, and that won't serve the national interest of the United States.
Yeah.
And this guy knows very well the dangers of such a game.
Well, first of all, I don't think Mr. Rex Tillerson will be giving any advice to President Donald Trump once he goes into the Oval Office on January the 20th, the advice to break away from the one China policy. I think Mr. Tillerson knows very well the importance of China as a market, the largest market eventually for oil and gas in his traditional way of doing business, and also going forward the importance of China-US relations and also the complexities of the cross-strait relations. I think if anything, I think Mr. Tillerson probably will be a big advocate for closer Russian-US relations, especially in the energy sector. Russians are actually welcoming U.S. investment in the upstream.
Do you foresee more clashes between civil servants and ex-generals? Because most of the picks of President-elect about the cabinet portfolio are ex-generals. James Mattis, who is nicknamed Mad Dog. He is John Bolton. He is said to have a revolver on the wall.
He's not a military guy.
He is not a military guy, but he's very tough. He's very super hawkish.
Yes.
So, do you foresee clashes between civil servants, civilians, and the military guys?
I think invariably. I mean, the issue of waterboarding came up, and a number of people said in the CIA, we will not implement that even if we were ordered to by the executive office. I think will be blowback if they tried to do these things. I mean, Mad Dog Mattis sounds the worst, but if you start looking at Michael Flynn and his promotion of non-factual news, of all sorts of conspiracy theories, he is much more concerning and things like that. But let's get one thing straight. The days when it was a three-cornered game between the US, Russia, and China are over. We're in a multipolar world. Today, the people who are watching to this day are coming from over 190 countries. And they're looking at this, and I think they're tired of this assumption that the US can create a new reality based on putting itself at the center of the universe. Those days have passed. We need to figure out how we get along in the reality that we're in, rather than trying to go back to and capture a reality that was.
When we come back next time for another edition of Dialogue, perhaps we will discuss whether policy options will be generated in locker room conversations between this president and his generals. Until next time, goodbye.